Welcome, adventurers. Today we're diving deep into the dusty tomes and forgotten scrolls of Baldur's Gate 1, reading aloud a few of the in-game books that breathe life into the world of Faerun. Some hold crucial lore, others paint vivid pictures of ancient lands, legendary figures, and the daily lives of those who call the Sword Coast home. Whether you're here for lore, nostalgia, or just love a good story, pull up a chair by the fire. This one's for you. If you enjoy this kind of immersive content, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment on your favorite book or moment. It really helps a small channel like this grow in a big world full of dragons and algorithms. Now, let's turn the page and see what tales await.
Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AM Komnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
One of the first quest givers we run into in Baldur's Gate 1 is Philidia. Philidia has gotten tired of hearing all the arthritic shuffling feet within the walls of Candlekeep Library, so she's decided to take a stroll outside, but has unfortunately lost her copy of the History of Halrua and has asked us to find it for her. We find it hidden within a haystack. The History of Halrua. Halrua was settled centuries ago by wizards fleeing the Faerun in what was to become the Anauroch Desert. The first wizards came in unique flying ships invented by the Netherese and found a beautiful and rich country settled only by shepherds and large herds of aurochs and wild growth. It was here that the wizards decided to make a stand should the Faerun follow. The Faerun never did, but Halrua has had to defend itself from attacks by all of its neighbors since then. Over the centuries, Dambreth has attacked and raided Halrua's ports and borders multiple times. Once, led by the magic-resistant barbarian, the Dambrae occupied all of the country south of Lake Halrua. They were defeated in battle by the great archmage Mycontil, who slew their barbarian leader. 40,000 Dambrae attacked and were stopped by 500 Halruans. More than 200 Halruan wizards, including Mycontil, died in the battle. The last attack upon Halrua was less than 100 years ago, through the Teleth Pass by the power-hungry king Lapelia. He had allied with the bandits from the Waste, though this time the Halruans were able to field a larger force, including fighting men as well as wizards in their skyships. The attackers were easily routed. Halrua also suffered from a civil war about 5 centuries ago, when a number of mages advocated beginning new experiments in magic, ones which even the Netherese didn't approve of. The renegades were driven from the region, but went on to found the land of Thay, or so it is said in Halrua. Since then, Halrua has been at peace. They have had no declared wars, though it still suffers from raids from Dambrae pirates, bandits of the Waste, savages from the Mahir jungles, and any other pirate, raider, or hungry wizard who thinks that magic and wealth grow on trees in Halrua. This constant raiding has made the Halruans very defensive, warlike, and traditional. The people say that since wizards have always led them, wizards always will. But Lydia is ecstatic to get her book back, and she says that we remind her of Grind a little bit. It is interesting that the residents of Candlekeep value books in such high regard. She even gives us a gem as a reward for returning it. Eventually, our travels take us to Beregost, and at Beregost we run across a familiar face, Firebeat Elvenhair. We may have run across him at the Candlekeep Inn. He asks that we find him the history of the faithful coin, and if we can do so, he would not only reimburse us, but possibly give us a little extra in return. History of the faithful coin. Old tales tell that luck plays a crucial role in each person's life. When each newborn baby enters into the realms, Timor flips a coin formed from the remnants of the original goddess of luck, Tish. Bishaba calls it in the air, the moon heads, or the cloak tails. If Bashaba is right, that person is cursed with misfortune for the rest of his or her days. If she's wrong, Lady Luck smiles on that child for the rest of his or her life. For some rare beings, the coin lads edge on, and these luckless few can forge their own fates, for they have more freedom over their own destinies than the powers themselves.
It's hard to find decent folk nowadays.
We hand him the history of the fateful coin that he's been asking for, and in return, he gives us another book in return, The History of the Dead 3. The History of the Dead 3, Knucklebones, Skull Bowling, and the Empty Throne. In ages past, there was but one god of strife, death, and the dead, and he was known as Zhurgal, lord of the end of everything. Zhurgal fomented and fed on the discord among mortals and powers alike. When beings slew each other in their quest for power or in their hatred, he welcomed them into his shadowy kingdom of eternal gloom. As all things died, everything came to him eventually, and over time, he built his power into a kingdom unchallenged by any other god. Eventually, however, he grew tired of his duties, for he knew them too well. Without challenge there is nothing, and in nothingness there is only gloom. In such a state, the difference between absolute power and absolute powerlessness is undetectable. During this dark era, there arose three powerful mortals, Bane, Bal, and Merkel, who lusted after the power Zhurgal wielded. The trio formed an unholy pact, agreeing that they would dare to seek such ultimate power or die in the attempt. Over the length and breadth of the realms, they strode seeking powerful magic and spells and defying death at every turn. No matter what monster they confronted or what spells they braved, the three mortals emerged unscathed at every turn. Eventually, the trio destroyed one of the seven lost gods, and they each seized a portion of his divine essence for themselves. The trio then journeyed into the Grey Waste and sought out the Castle of Bone. Through armies of skeletons, legions of zombies, hordes of non-corporeal undead, and the gauntlet of liches, they battled. Eventually, they reached the object of their lifelong quest, the Bone Throne. "I claim this throne of evil," shouted Bane the tyrant. "I'll destroy you before you can raise a finger," threatened Bal the assassin. "And I shall imprison your essence for eternity," promised Merkel the necromancer. Zhurgal rose from his throne with a weary expression and said, "The throne is yours. I have grown weary of this empty power. Take it if you wish. I promise to serve and guide you as your seneschal until you grow comfortable with the position." Before the stunned trio could react, the Lord of the Dead continued, "Who amongst you shall rule?" The trio immediately fell to fighting amongst themselves while Zhurgal looked on with indifference. When eventually it appeared that either they would all die of exhaustion or battle on for an eternity, the Lord of the End of Everything intervened. "After all you have sacrificed, would you come away with nothing? Why don't you divide the portfolios of the office and engage in the game of skill for them?" asked Zhurgal. Bane, Bal, and Merkel considered the god's offer and agreed. Zhurgal took the heads of his three most powerful liches and gave them to the trio that they would compete by bowling the skulls. Each mortal rolled a skull across the Grey Waste, having agreed that the winner would be he who bowled the furthest. Malar, the Beast Lord, arrived to visit Zhurgal at this moment. After quickly ascertaining that the winner of the contest would get all of Zhurgel's power, he chased off after the three skulls to make sure that the contest would be halted until he had a chance to participate for part of the prize. Bane, Ball, and Merkel again fell to fighting, as it was obvious their sport was ruined, and again Zhurgel intervened. "Why don't you allow Lady Luck to decide so you don't have to share with the beast?" The trio agreed, and Zhurgel broke off his skeletal finger bones and gave them to the players. When Malar returned from chasing the skull, he found that the trio had just finished a game of knucklebones. Bane cried out triumphantly, "As winner, I choose to rule for all eternity as the ultimate tyrant. I can induce hatred and strife at my whim, and all will bow down before me while in my kingdom." Merkel, who had won second place, declared, "But I choose the dead, and by doing so, I truly win, because all you are lord over, Bane, will eventually be mine. All things must die, even gods." Ball, who finished third, demurred, "I choose death, and it is by my hand that all that you rule, Lord Bane, will eventually pass to Lord Merkel. Both of you must pay honor to me and obey my wishes, since I can destroy your kingdom, Bane, by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Merkel, by staying my hand." Malar growled in frustration, but could do nothing, and yet again only the beasts were left for him. And Zhurgel merely smiled, for he had been delivered. The town of Baldur's Gate and the Elf Song Tavern, one of my favorite locations. Let's take a peek inside. Inside, we spot a lady in quotes, Aleth Elendara. Let's see what she has to say.
Good eve to you. I am Aleth, the owner and proprietor. I trust the elf song will fit your needs, whatever they should be. I should be wary of the clientele if I were you. Everyone is quite on edge of late.
And we ask her, why should melancholy be so pervasive here? Is it not an ill feeling throughout the coast?
We have lost more than the average citizen. We have lost the lady. Often we are blessed by a strange phantom voice. It is an elvish maiden lamenting a lost love drowned at sea. Her voice is quite beautiful, and the reason I purchased this establishment in the first place. She has not uttered a note for nigh unto several tendae. Surely it is an omen of sorts, though I cannot say of what. I would have thought the economic troubles of the land too paltry to affect the concerns of the dead, but matters are often more complicated than they seem. I suppose they are often simpler as well, though that truth does not support my argument as well. Forget I mentioned it. Enjoy your stay.
In the bookshelf, we find the History of the Dragon Coast. History of the Dragon Coast. The history of the Dragon Coast is the history of money, particularly the darker side of the coin. Situated on the main trade routes between the Inner Sea and the Sword Coast, these lands never coalesced into a solid, coherent nation like Cormyr or Sembia. Instead, small, petty city-states have risen and fallen, powered by greed and the most powerful merchant or pirate faction of the day. As a result, the Dragon Coast has always been the home of the smuggler, the pirate, the rogue, and the hired killer. It has been the place where those seeking to skirt the law of more civilized nations of the north make landfall. It is here that the Red Wizards gain their access to the western heartlands and where the cult of the dragon launches its plots to the south. And it is here that independent secret societies and assassin guilds have had their greatest power. The last semblance of organized resistance to this trend was the reign of Varavan, last of the kings of Westgate. The monarchy of Westgate had long worked closely with the various mercantile and pirate factions. but Varavan attempted to stem the growing power of the merchant houses and petty lords. His sudden and mysterious death without acceptable heirs in 1248 DR opened the door for much of what now is commonplace in the Dragon Coast: corruption and treachery. It should be noted that while Varavan's name is still venerated in these lands, better known is Enrich, the greatest of the inner sea pirates, a brash and flamboyant rogue who united a pirate fleet beneath him and ruled from 1164 DR to his death in 1201 DR. Such it is in the Dragon Coast that good people are venerated, but the power of darker rogues is imitated. While we're here in Baldur's Gate, let's find a quiet place to rest and dive into the region's history with the books we've gathered. The history of Cormyr. Cormyr dates its years from the founding of House of Barskir 1,342 years ago, the first of the noble houses and the line of its kings. For the bulk of this time, Cormyr was little more than a single city, Solzale, and the few fortified outposts. At times, the monarch was forced by rebellion and intrigue to rule from those outposts instead of from the throne. King Alzun is the fourth of his name, and the 71st of its line. The land has been officially at peace for many years, since Rygard overthrew the last of the border raiders. However, Cormyr armies have taken part in many actions in nearby regions, recently mustering its forces to face Gondegal, the rebel of Arabel, to occupy Tivilton in the marches of the Dalelands, and to lead a crusade against the great Toljian horde invading from the east. One wit has noted that, yes, the land is at peace, but the army has to keep busy. In addition to pursuing major actions, Cormyr patrols often skirmish with bandits on the roads in the north and west, and are at present battling orcs and other creatures north and east of Cormyr in Tilver's Gap and Shadow Gap. Both of these areas are threatened by raiders who will menace Cormyr itself if they ever overrun Tivilton. Cormyr has built a fortress, Castle Crag, to defend the kingdom from attacks from that quarter, and maintains the High Horn to protect against attacks from the west. The history of Kalimshan. Kalimshan is older than either of the other empires of the Sands, first settled over 7,000 years ago by the Jinn, a humanoid race from the elemental planes of air. These Jinn were known to be very magical, and during the course of their rule, they developed many new spells previously not available in the plane of air. The Jinn prospered for over 1,000 years in Kalimshan, but their reign was ended by an invasion of creatures and minions from the plane of fire. Some say this is where the bitter hatred between Jinn and Ifrit started, though others contend this was just a result of a hatred that was already there. Whatever the cause, the battle was long and bloody. It took over 100 years to complete. The Jinn finally routed the attackers, but they are greatly weakened in the attempt. They slowly declined, and the last mention of the Jinn is just under 6,000 years old. For the next 4,000 years, Kalimshan was dominated by nomadic tribes of humans. Tribes from various places, Chult, the Shar, the Shining Plains, Chondath, and even and Cormyr took turns dominating only to be conquered by the next, nearly identical tribe. Slowly, the nomadic nature of the Kalimshan began to change. As explorers and traders from Waterdeep, and Cormyr discovered the wonders of the area, some tribes began to settle down and develop means of support like fishing, farming, or trading. These communities began to band together for mutual protection, and soon a civilization was born. It was only 1,300 years ago that the Shun Empire, now called Ilkhazar, came into being. The Shuns were a grand and glorious empire, and their excesses were their foundation of the Kalashite snobbery today. They grew wise and powerful in the ways of magic, and ships and caravans bearing the Shun flag traveled across the realms. Shun himself, a particularly powerful mage, created a book of great power during this time called the Tome of the Unicorn. The exact location of the tome has been lost in time, But since the book is 2 feet by 3 feet and made of pure metal, it is likely to be around somewhere. 900 years ago, the Shun Empire abruptly vanished. A great magical upheaval was suspected at first, but learned mages of the other lands dispute the claim. A force that great, they say, would have disturbed magical powers and beings throughout the realms, and that didn't happen. Sages who have studied the Shun at great length have reached no definite conclusions, but the most popular theories today center around plague or disease that decimated the population. Today, the Shun impact on Kalimshan is still great. The grandeur of that empire is responsible, more than anything else, for the strong national character of Kalimshan today. The ruins of the Shun's greatest city, Monrativi Teshimir, can still be found in the wilderness to the west of the edge of the Forest of Mir. See below for more on Monrativi Teshimir. Since the fall of Shun, no force or people has risen to solemnly dominate the land. There are half dozen or so major cities, each of which exerts its power over its own area. About 170 years ago, a man in Kalamport amassed a large army and declared himself Pasha over the land. Before that army could march, however, the representatives of each major city met and agreed to recognize the Pasha's authority in limited areas and to pay a small tribute to him, enough to pay for the works the Pasha was expected to do. The oldest son of each Pasha inherits the title. If there is no son, the mayors of each large city select a new one. The current Pasha, Rajid Denizpol, has ruled for over 18 years and is the grandson of a Pasha elected by the mayors of Kalimshan 44 years ago. History of the Dambrath. The nation of Dambrath was formed out of a barbarian kingdom almost a half a millennium ago by a powerful alliance of priestesses of Loviatar and the Drow from the city of Tillendret. In 211 DR, fleeing from the destruction of the homeland by the then great kingdoms of Unther and Mulharand, 4 tribes of barbarians entered Dambrath. They found a coast where the dolphins danced and plains where the grass was long. They roamed from the borders of the walls of Halrua as far east as the current borders of Eastagun. They soon became known as the Archaean, or People of the Wind. In 545 DR, a great war chief, Reinhard, arose to lead the tribes. The halflings of Loren were quickly enslaved, and several of the coastal cities of Dirpar were captured or razed. Estegon fell to his rule, and eventually Reinhard turned his attention to Halrua. An army of 40,000 horsemen and a fleet of 50 ships mounted a coordinated attack. And even though Reinhard was able to get beyond the walls of Halrua and occupy the cities of Mithil, Galdil, and Zalsu, their magics proved to be more than a match for the invaders. Reinhard was finally defeated in a great battle at Solzair by the Archmage Mycontil and his troop of wizards. Reinhard's son, Reinhard II, took command of the army and set out on a 2-month overland retreat. He arrived home with 1,000 surviving fighting men and no shaman. Reinhard II proved to be as good a ruler in defeat as his father was in war. He consolidated his forces and pulled home almost all of his troops, as he knew that the defeat made them tempting prey for raiders and encroaching monsters. This action allowed for a safe development of his peoples. By the time the 9th Reinhard was king in 802 DR, the Archaeans were fat and lazy. Reinhard IX, or Reinhard the Foolish as he is more commonly known, insisted on expanding his nation to gain more gold to finance his military campaigns. He ordered the mining of many rich lodes of silver and electrum in the No-Watch Mountains. But before his plans of expansion could begin, the miners encountered the Drow of Tillender. The Drow were outraged and began a steady series of raids and attacks on the Archaean strongholds. Whole villages were destroyed overnight, and no trace of the invaders could be found. Reinhard IX committed the foolhardy action of attacking the Drow in retaliation. While the Archaeans managed to get a force into the Drow city, this action only succeeded in uniting the normally chaotic Drow. For once, the full power of a Drow city was turned against an enemy. The battle quickly moved back to the surface. Reinhardt's raiders were wiped out, leaving Reinhardt with only a small portion of his original military. This was not enough for the Drow, who demanded total enslavement of the entire surface nation. The Archaeans resisted valiantly, and the war went on for 3 decades at tremendous cost and life to both sides. Finally, the Drow had the Archaean forces cornered at Baldur, almost without hope. The defenders were overjoyed when a group of half-elven pilgrims appeared on the scene. The high priestess Cather Shentar offered to aid of her clerics to help defend the city, and Reinhardt took this to be an omen from the gods. A priestess was placed with almost every company. Within a 10-day, the Drow struck. The priestess did indeed prove to be of great aid, but to the Drow. Every priestess turned on the Archaeans, and Cather herself slew Reinhardt. The Drow were still weakened by the battle, and only the presence of the priestesses enabled them to win. Cather, realizing the unique advantage she possessed, made a deal that even the suspicious Drow embraced. Her priestess would rule the land, and in exchange, they would provide access to the surface for the Drow, trading weapons, slaves, and supplies. The Drow were delighted with this brazen offer from a surface dweller. Reinhardt had been slain and the insult avenged, and after 30 years of war, the Drow were not particularly interested in Dambrath. They did insist, however, on taking the best captured males as slaves. Cather quickly agreed to this, seeing the males as an obstacle to her own power. Cather ruled for 205 years. She fulfilled her promise to make Dambrath, or the Nation of Pain, a bastion of evil in the realms. In her time, Cather saw the priesthood of Loviatar expand to thousands, and faith in the Beast Lords previously worshipped by the Archaeans was nearly eradicated. Many of the Archaeans were able to escape their new mistresses and flee to the Swagdar. There, they resumed their almost forgotten nomadic life. The priestesses of Loviatar continued to enjoy good relations with the Drow, and some even took mates, creating a race of Drow half-elves. These dark half-elves became known as the Cryptic, or Noble Ones. Most are priestesses of Loviatar, though many are mages as well. They consolidated their power, learning much from the area of the Shibali, or Lower Ones, as the Archaeans are now called. The capital of Dambrath was established at Cather, built after Cather's passing, and named in her honor. Her death came at the hands of her daughter, Belina, who had grown tired of waiting for her mother to die. Belina ruled for only 5 years, however, before her own daughter, Candlekeep, assumed the throne in the same fashion. Candlekeep ruled for 54 years, eventually falling in battle against a gold dragon. She died childless, and her niece Melanith assumed the throne. Melanith faced an increasing population and unrest among males who longed for a return to their prestige of old. Melanith did not return their previous states, but she did make use of them. Fearing that the great nations of Mulharan and Unther might rise again, she decided that mundane tasks such as defense of the kingdom would be handled by men. She was the first to name a male to the post of war chief. Saladar, a Cryptic, became the queen's consort. His term as war chief was characterized by widespread bribery and corruption. He was, however, responsible for getting many privileges returned to the Archaeans. After Melanith's rule, the Shibali were considered second-class citizens rather than slaves. Though males were granted more power during her rule, Melanith also solidified the split between the sexes. While the rulers of Dambrath had been females over 2 centuries, it was more because of competence than gender. Melanith, however, decreed that men could have no authority except over other men. The female-led hierarchy of Loviatar was quick to back this move. Many of the bravest and best men of the kingdom perished in raids on Estegon, Durpar, and the bandit tribes of Veldorn, and against the gnolls that had returned to the Knollwatch Mountains. Some even fought at the sides of the Drow in their battle with the Snurfleben city of Aventine. The deep gnomes were destroyed, but so were the Shibali. The Drow and the Krintri were largely unharmed, and for their aid, the Krintri were rewarded with a number of Drow males to breed to their race. Melanith took a Drow male as her consort to replace Saladar, who had perished in the conflict. The Drow, Nim Inthig, fathered 3 daughters and a son. It was at this time that Melanith began the isolation policy that Dambreth still follows today. Melanith ruled for 156 years, her daughter Osatil for 125. The current queen of Dambreth, Yanandra, who is known in Dambreth as the Pirate Queen, is said to have sailed as far south as Zakara in pillaging raids. Yanandra has been ruling for 71 years and is beginning to show signs of age. She has 3 daughters as well, named Luathern, Meltrel, and Hassafir. While she does remain extremely popular, especially to the Krintri, the children of leaders in this land are not known to patiently wait their turn. The history of Dirpar and Var the Golden. Dirpar and Var the Golden share a common history. Over 3,000 years ago, these countries were both subject to the great kingdom of Raurin. When Raurin fell in negative 2488 DR, the countries of Dirpar and Var barely survived the destruction. Rioting, mass destruction, and hatred of nobility were rampant, and the 2 countries descended into barbarism for over 2 millennia. Finally, after most of the barbarian tribes were wiped out by the great empire of Mulharan, a great leader emerged. Satama, a mere trader, experienced a divine revelation and formulated a new philosophy. All things in the world were connected, were part of a single creation spirit, and all the gods of the realms were merely parts of the same entity. Soon, all the shining lands embraced the teachings of Satama, and the seeds of civilization were laid in what came to be known as the Lands of the One. Since the Lands of the One had many natural resources, trade with Mulharan and Lurin became a way of life. Merchants were honored above all. In time, the Majra of Dirpar and the Raja of Var were replaced with a council of merchants. During this time, the land suffered occasional raiding attacks from the horsewomen of Dambreth, and many skirmishes with the neighboring countries of Estegon and Ogarth. In 1023 DR, after an armed peace had been worked out with Ogarth, the Council of Merchants decided that something needed to be done about the raiders from Estegon, who were hurting trade with other countries. War was an inconvenience, but interrupting trade was life-threatening. Jeradim, the richest merchant in the lands, was given power to negotiate a settlement. During these negotiations, he proved, at least in the eyes of the Dirparians, that he was indeed a master trader that he seemed. Estegon had just tried a foolish invasion of Dambreth. The vengeful female leaders of that land wiped out nearly every able-bodied man that they sent. The monsters of Veldorn were causing problems, and Estegon was going through a famine. It was here that Jeradim showed his fine merchant's instincts. He could not pass up an advantage and began bargaining the most outrageous trade of all time. He met with the leaders of Estegon, a fearful king and his nobles, and explained the advantages of Dirparian life and the philosophy of the Adama, the oneness of all things. He bargained for days until finally the kings made the trade. He purchased the whole of Estegon for the countries of Dirpar and Var at the price of 24 gems. He also promised protection and to help their integration into the Dirparian way of life. Thus were formed the Shining Lands. Within 100 years, the 3 countries shared a common way of life, and with the added strength and resources of Estegon, Dirparian merchants increased their trading range. They roamed as far east as Karatur, as far north as the Sea of Fallen Stars, and west to Dambreth and Haurua. At the present time, with the newly discovered lands of Mastika and Zakara beckoning, the future looks bright. The history of Estegon. Estegarn history follows a different path than those of Durpar and Var. The Gunders were conquered in 551 DR by Reinhard I, war chief of the Archeans of Dambrath. Estegon regained its independence when Reinhard was slain by the Hauruan mage Mycontil, though the country soon degenerated into a group of small independent city-states. Skirmishes with Var and between the city-states continued for several centuries until a king once again united the country. King Borneal was a skilled ruler, and under him Estegon began to prosper. His descendants did not share his wisdom, and in 1053 DR, King Selkarin more than illustrated this. He failed to conquer Durpar, and Veldorn resisted his challenges. An avowed misogynist, Selkarin turned his attentions to the matriarchy of Dambrath. He led a large fleet to attack Dambrath, taking extreme losses, including his own life. Selkarin died childless, so his brother Seltarir was crowned king. The new ruler faced a country with most of its fighting men gone and an unforeseen problem: famine. The famine was caused by a blight that wiped out nearly all of the year's crops in Estegon. This made him eager for a deal posed by the Durparian merchant Geradim, and in a legendary trade, the entire country of Estegon was sold. Contrary to popular rumor, Seltarir did not trade away the country for 24 pearls. In actuality, he received diamonds worth almost 1,000,000 gold pieces. The sudden wealth gave him an instant seat on the Council of Merchants, so he retained a measure of rule in addition to his fortune. Shaka Seltarir is still the richest chakra in Estegon to this day. In the years that followed, the Gunders began rebuilding their lives under their new circumstance, and now they compete on equal footing with the merchants of Durpar and Var. History of Gondegal, the Lost King. Arabel, long under the dominion of Cormyr, had for a time become the center of a swordsman empire. This swordsman was Gondegal, the Lost King, who in the year of the dragon, 1352 DR, attempted to carve a kingdom for himself centered on Arabel. It was to extend north to the Desertsmith Mountains, south and west of Wyvernwater, and the farms outlying from Evening Star and east to Tilver's Gap and the mountain passes. In the years following, people would say that Gondegal's reach was no longer than his blade. He could not hold any of the territory against the might of Cormyr, Symbia, Daggerdale, Tilverton, and several other dales, all of whom he drew the blood and ire in the making of his throne. Gondegal ruled for less than a season, though he reigned officially for scarcely 8 days. The remainder of his rule was spent fighting here and there against one foe or another in the lands he claimed. His troops were largely mercenary, and his treasury of seized goods was small and soon gone. One night, Gondegal's force simply melted away before the advancing troops of Cormyr and was gone. King Azun IV retook Arabel on that morn without wetting a blade. No one has ever found the body of Gondegal. He is known to have fled north and then east via Tushwave. But then his fate becomes a matter of conflicting rumor and legend. Some believe he still lives with a score or more of loyal followers, keeping court in the wilds somewhere, a careful and ruthless bandit who takes care that none survive his attacks to carry tales anywhere. When entire caravans vanish at times anywhere between the high dells and far-off Impelter, he is blamed by talk in the taverns. Gondegal was said to be a tall, gray-haired warrior of considerable personal skill and intelligence. His badge was a gray wolf's head, face on, with red eyes. Caravan guards often warned merchants to beef up the escort on a particular caravan, else thy gold will soon be gilding Gondegal's throne. Gondegal was an impeccable swordsman and somewhat chaotic in his self-professed neutral alignment. If he does indeed yet live, the magic or treasure he carries and who his allies might be are all unknown. Gondegal's reign had a great influence on the king of Cormyr. At the time, in his second decade of rule, not only was Aswin forced to put down any effective rebellion in his own country, he was forced to pay more attention to matters outside Suzail, to become the ruler of a nation as opposed to a city-state. Further, the bloodless assault on Arabel was Azun's first true experience at the head of his army, and the joy of freeing the people of Arabel is one that remains with him. History of Lurin, Land of the Halflings. The Halflings of Lurin claim that it is the original homeland of Halflings in the realms. Although other Halflings may disagree with this, it is true that Lurin was settled hundreds, perhaps thousands of years ago. Lurin's history is one of conquerors and subjugation. Throughout the centuries, the Halflings have been conquered by the barbarians who used to inhabit Dambrath, by the kingdom of Estegon, and even once by the monsters of Beldorn. In every case, the invaders were eventually defeated because they made the mistake of underestimating the Halflings due to their small stature. A good bit of mischief, mayhem, and general troublemaking by the Halflings also helped end the occupations. Lurin is enjoying unprecedented prosperity. The Halflings are currently taking advantage of their relationship with the nation of Dirpar, their biggest customer and greatest competitor. Also, through these close ties with Dirpar, Lurin has protected itself against another Dambrai invasion. The rulers of Dambrath must know that if they begin to expand to the east, they will arouse the ire of Dirpar, as well as Var and Estegon. The threat of a trade embargo and/or military consequences have kept this aggressive nation away from the Luriners. The history of Sembia. The land of Sembia was settled by humans coming to the Sea of Fallen Stars from the south, and was originally chosen for its strands of huge high-quality Ilier wood timber so prized in shipbuilding. However, as the forests were cleared over the years, the tree cutters came into increasing conflict with elves who feared the loss of their entire wood. This would undoubtedly have occurred had not the hastily gathered mercenary troops of the fledgling land been defeated by the elves at Singing Arrows 884 DR. This battle convinced distant Chandrath to abandon its holdings in the region and allow the immigrant Symbians to establish their independence, though as little more than a collection of rival city-states, much like the Moonseer Vast of today. It also sets the stage for the appearance of the Raven. The young country grew strong as farms prospered in the newly cleared lands. Craftsmen arrived from the south to take advantage of this chance to acquire land and wealth, bringing their trades with them. Brauthavir, the Raven, unified city-states and towns in the face of continuing elven menace and insisted on maintaining a standing army, which he kept by practice of policing Sembia's borders and improving the roads. At this time, in 913 DR, Sembia became as a true nation. The Moon Sea's mineral wealth was discovered by humankind about this time. The pressure began to grow for a trade road through the elven woods to make Sembia the world's gateway to all these riches. The Raven went alone as an envoy to the elven court. There, he asked the elders of their council to approve a road open to humans, linking Sembia to the shores of the Dragon Sea. An earlier road had been destroyed during the conflict and was now overgrown. Raven proposed that the elves choose the route and retain control of it and the woods around it, so that no woodcutting or human settlement would occur. The elves had earlier made similar arrangements with the Dalesmen, and had no difficulty with the concept of such an agreement. However, the inhabitants of the Velersdale, now Harrowsdale, refused the proposal, not wanting or needing such a road at that time. Curious, since later a ruler of Harrowsdale commissioned the disastrous Halifax Trail. The elves, not wishing to offend longtime allies, refused Raven's request. Rebuffed, the Raven then threatened to exterminate the isolated elves in Amonthoi. the last embattled remnant of the elves in Symbia if the elven court did not cooperate. If the road was built, however, they would be free to trade or not trade as they wish. The elves agreed under this pressure, and Symbia's financial future was secured. Hillsfar on the shores of the Dragon Sea became a commercial meeting ground between humankind and elves, as did Elventree. The route the elves chose ran past the base of the Standing Stone as a reminder of earlier, less hostile dealings between humans and elves. Over the years, the elves of Amanthoi came north to join the Brethren, or slipped away to seek Evermeet, leaving their wood to gradually disappear. Symbia grew rich under merchant leaders of increasing wisdom, such as Saer, for whom Saerb was named, and Selgar, for whom Chancelgaunt was renamed as Selgaunt. Before his death, Ralthovir, the Raven, saw that these merchants had a strong standing council of merchant elders to advise them, and to ensure that no ruler could hold on to power by force of arms. Then this far-sighted man, creator of a nation, now half blind and infirm from old war wounds, rode north to the elven woods and disappeared. None know what happened to him or where his bones lie, save perhaps some few elder elves.
We hope you enjoyed exploring some of the ancient tomes we uncovered on our journey through Faerun. The Baldur's Gate series is brimming with rich lore and deep history, and we've only just scratched the surface. If you like this dive into the world's stories and want to hear more, let us know in the comments below. Thanks so much for listening, and may your dreams be filled with adventure and magic.
Tonight you dream of blood, not of blood on a blade or the blood on your hands, but an ichor that runs as a torrent through the realms, a flood that pours across the fields and forests, an ocean that floats you to the world's edge and threatens to cascade off into the void. This blood seems a frightening thing, a massive force that sweeps away all resistance. As a whole, it is a monster and it cannot be stopped. Were it to be viewed from on high, it would seem to cover the entire world in its red-black embrace. You, however, do not have such a lofty perch. From within the deluge you can see it does not move as one, but is filled with currents, eddies, and undertows. Pockets of calm afford breathing space, whilst violent whirlpools threaten to rend limb from limb. Ultimately, it seems undirected and lacks a driving will, a quality you have in abundance. You may be caught within, but sufficient determination can shape what you need to survive. There are still options open, still choices to be made. As the tide presses forward, you steer as you wish, atop a ship called Persistence and under sails made of resolve. A sudden and deliberate wave puts an end to your course and to the dream. It would seem that the flood does have some will and took offense to your enjoying the ride.